later. With that, we're going to move into our panel. I hope you've been waiting around for this. I'm really excited for it. Mike, I'm going to bring you on first. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Derek?
Hey, doing great. I'm really excited for this session. I think everybody here has always thought about how am I going to either get investment or have a successful exit for their brand. Everyone, wants to serve a purpose and help people, but at the end of the day, we're growing businesses, and it ends in one of two ways: either getting that investment for fueling the growth, or selling it and letting somebody else fold it into their conglomerate. So I'm really looking forward to you talking with your panelists about what makes that business investable and how to get more valuation out of our stores.
Yeah, we're super excited. Again, Derek, thanks so much for the opportunity, and we're looking forward to it, as well as thinking about when it even makes sense to fundraise, right? Or if you should bootstrap, and kind of what like a lifestyle business looks like as well.
Perfect. Awesome. I'm going to bring your panelists on. I'm going to slide out here. I'll let you introduce them and get moving.
Sweet. Hey, how are we all doing?
What's up, Mike?
Hey, everybody. Coming on video in about 30 seconds. My apologies. And how's it going, Mike?
All good, Samit. For those of you who don't know, first of all, thank you so much, Derek, for the opportunity of having us all here. For those of you that don't know, I run a podcast called The Consumer VC where I interview investors. I've interviewed all three of these people. These are three of my favorites. And we talk about this stuff kind of all day, all the time. So this panel is all about investing in digitally native brands, e-commerce brands. And these are three of the best. I guess quick intros. Anna, we'll start with you. Tell us a little about yourself and about Coefficient Capital.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike. So I'm Anna. I'm with Coefficient Capital. We are a $170 million early growth fund. So we typically lead Series A and Series B checks, 5 to 30 million check size on average into businesses that are doing north of 5 million in trailing 12 annual revenues. Looking for consumer businesses that are using technology to create competitive advantage. So technology can be kind of a broad swath of things. So it could be using personalization or customization to drive enhanced retention. It can be, a really compelling organic customer acquisition strategy. It can be real IP and process and patented technology that you've built into the product layer. So technology is broad, but we look to back category leaders in various consumer verticals. So that's a bit on us. I've been in consumer investing for the last 5 years. I was previously at a later stage fund called BMG Partners, and then building out the consumer portfolio of a tech fund called Tribeca Ventures when I helped the team launch Coefficient 3 years ago.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. And for those that aren't familiar with maybe the terminology in venture, Anna and her team at Coefficient, they invest at Series A. That's a little bit on the later stage side compared to not really so much like first check-in per se, as Anna said, like 5 million trailing revenue. Kiva, tell us a little about yourself and Selva.
Happy to, Mike. So I am the co-founder and managing partner of a firm called Selva Ventures. We invest a little bit earlier than Anna and her team at Coefficient do. We will go as late as Series A, but typically focus on seed. We're currently investing out of our first fund, which is $10 million in size. And our mission as a firm is to invest in brands that make their consumers' lives better. So to us, that means better ingredients, better function, and better emotional connection with the consumer. We focus on branded consumables, so food, beverage, personal care, beauty, vitamin supplements, and pet, and then have invested across all of those categories so far, including into a couple companies like Mudwater, Verb Energy, House, and Midday Squares. In terms of my career, I started out in the later stage investing world as well about 7 years ago at a firm called TPG Capital in San Francisco. Was doing large cap buyouts of consumer retail companies like J. Crew and Neiman Marcus, and eventually moved into the earlier stage at a company called Circle Up that launched a fund in 2017 that I helped them move forward on before eventually launching Selva in 19. And so have been excited to be a part of this ecosystem and spent a lot of time with the other two panelists here. So this will be a great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kiva. So different to Anna, just to kind of get everyone in the loop. So Kiva kind of invests more like the first check-in, early stages, the seed stage. So a kind of an earlier stage where you're at in the journey than Anna. Samit, tell us a bit about yourself and SwiftArc.
Yep. Hey, everybody. Good to see many familiar faces here. And Mike, thank you once again for inviting me to do something with you. It's been always an absolute pleasure. Also know Anna and Kiva quite well, all the way to the day that when Anna cold LinkedIn me when she was over at Tribeca Venture Partners as she was working through and building her great network of people. I'm always going to say that because I think it's just a good example where context matters and you always get to build great friendships and relationships from that. I've known Kiva when he was over at Circle Up and building the Growth Partners division from there. And of course, now what he's doing at Selva. So always good to see friends here. I'm Sumit. I run operations and infrastructure at an early and growth stage venture capital firm called SwiftArc Ventures. We have been focusing the world of consumer and healthcare. We're operating out of 4 key initiatives. Our early stage fund, SwiftArc Venture Labs, which we just closed our 4th deal into in a drink company called Barcode. That's a very exciting life, I should say, because Bar is an incredible human being. Our growth fund, SwiftArc Ventures, which is more larger private equity type investments, a telehealth focused fund focusing on the future of telemedicine and digital health, and a brand new beauty fund that is run by, has a council full of 4 founders and 80% of the LP contingent, all women, focusing on women-led brands in the beauty space, and closing on our first deal actually for a company called Alley-Oop. So we're really excited about making our moves in there. So prior to that, I was also in the world of venture capital. I helped start and run up sourcing for an early stage consumer venture capital firm called Brand Foundry. And then prior to that was in the private equity consulting side of things, also in consumer. So a lot of early stage and late stage work through everything. Now, SwiftArc itself, our whole mentality, if I were to describe it in one sentence, is to empower operators. Every single one of our initiatives, our fund initiatives, is run by operating just operators that have over collectively 2 centuries worth of experience and expertise from the startup and venture capital world all the way Fortune 500 and global multi-billion-dollar businesses and organizations. We have everyone from the former CFO and COO of Deckers, who is responsible for the acquisitions and scales of companies like UGG, Teva, and Hoka, as well as the former head of M&A and specialty brands for Procter & Gamble and Revlon, is responsible for a lot of their growth of various divisions. Then, of course, various startup founders and VCs who have been involved. It's been an exciting time, and I'm excited to work with all of y'all and do this great panel together.
Well, thank you, Samit. Thank you. And also really appreciate all of you. Samit, really appreciate you because I think similar to Anna reaching you out back in the day on LinkedIn, when I was like super early with a podcast, I think like episode 4 or 5, you hit me up on Twitter and then just introduced me to a world of people. So really grateful for you. Really grateful for all of you as well. So the first question I have is, why even invest in digitally native brands? What's the opportunity? I mean, compared to software, you're always going to have marginal cost. Outcomes typically don't look as big. What's the argument for investing in digitally native brands, since especially technology investors have kind of waned from investing in these types of businesses? And what are the opportunities that you're seeing? Maybe Anna, we'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So we love digital brands for a number of reasons. We always look to kind of enhance or build upon like a digital footprint and identity through driving brands towards omnichannel, which we'll probably get into later. But we see the digital piece as being an opportunity to really develop a close relationship with a consumer that you own through kind of your D2C channel. You're getting reviews on your site, you're getting, comments on your Instagram or TikTok or whatever social channel you're on. So you're hearing directly from your consumers, which if you think about when your brand ultimately lives on shelf in Walmart, you're not getting a ton of that direct feedback. You're getting, turns data, but you're not getting really like rich conversation. And I think that early on helps you develop a pretty intimate relationship with your customer. It helps you develop insights that then inform product and strategy going forward. It informs like what your channel strategy is offline. So if you find that, your consumer has a really high cart value and, the best retaining customers are, the people who also shop at Erewhon, then probably you should launch your brand at Erewhon as opposed to, trying to launch your brand at Walmart right off the bat. So I think it provides kind of a really nice data set. And I think if you can really get the economics of digital right, launching retail is expensive. There's a lot of like hidden costs that exist offline that don't necessarily exist online. So when you go into a retailer, there's things like slotting fees and trade spend and all of that kind of ends up being pretty expensive. So getting the economics right of a digital business can really help to support, scale at the retail level down the line. So that's a little bit of what we look for. I always love to hear what Kiva thinks about these things, though. So leave some for him.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I would start by saying that traditionally, when technology-focused venture capital firms first started investing in digitally native brands, it was because the opportunity is incredibly attractive. You have massive markets in consumer goods, and you have really low consumer affinity in a lot of them. And the reason why is that as the consumer brands that many of us grew up with scaled, they became much more focused on their customer, the retailer that was ultimately helping them reach the consumer, than the consumer themselves. And somewhere along the way, either through the demands of being a public company hitting quarters and lowering costs, to just the salespeople spending so much time trying to win more doors, they lost sight of what the consumer actually wanted. And so the opportunity to reach that consumer and solve their problems in a real way, whether it be a suitcase or a razor that didn't cost as much, or you name the snack that was more aligned with the health preferences of the consumer, there became an opportunity to reach that consumer directly. Similar to Anna, we don't actually view D2C only as the same as digitally native. We think digitally native is a great way to start a brand, a great way to form that consumer connection, and a great way to learn on your way to ultimately reaching the consumer wherever they are. But I think that's something that ultimately is best placed for a consumer products focused investment firm to do.
Yeah, those are some great points. Samit, if there's anything you also want to chime in here.
No, I mean, a lot of the key points I was going to mention were mentioned by both Anna and by Kiva. And I think there's just really ultimately one thing to add is just the level of the customer journey. No matter where a customer starts, whether it's online or offline, that the level of a brand being digitally native is really just more an intertwining to build that relationship between the customer and the brand itself and the team behind the brand. Like, no matter how you're interacting from them, the best kind of customer loyalty doesn't always mean you're actually checking out for a product and buying a product every time. Like, LTV can actually have a bit of a non-AOV related level of transaction. And if you can build that kind of loyalty across it all, that's something that you will have the most powerful result of any brand, which is to basically get free marketing from your almost unambassador type people, but also just build that kind of reputation that people always will go to for it. I mean, we think about some of the most powerful and important brands out there where they even aren't actually known by smell. And I think that if you can build that kind of relationship, especially as a brand early on, and being, again, digitally native is such an important tactic to it, it always should still be viewed upon as a channel and never an absolute, but it is that means to the ultimate end of that kind of loyalty.
I mean, you've all three of you touched on a number of great points. On your last point, Samit, I think this idea that, and I know it gets thrown around a lot, but building community, organic growth, and not really so much relying on, relying much more on word of mouth, especially in these times where, when it comes to inorganic growth, Facebook and Google are pretty saturated as before. What are maybe some interesting case studies that you've seen where, when it comes to how brands of today are really building that word of mouth kind of virality and kind of developing this like kind of maybe core audience that could result into a cult brand?
There's a bunch of different examples I've seen for young brands and even more established brands in the consumer product world that have been very interesting to me on the level of community. I'll touch on two. One is a startup called Nori. Nori is run by two incredible women, and they make a really nice looking and next generation steam presser. So you can press your clothes and get all the wrinkles out from it. They've done a great job in terms of the launch and the build out of the product as well, but they did a great job of like building out their first level of initial customers and conversations with them as they were developing each piece of the product. And then, of course, as they launched it out and scaled it out, they knew that because it's still a hardware product in its end, there is a certain number of customers that can truly feel comfortable, like not just, of course, obtaining it, but really utilizing it for context purposes. They kept leaning on the customers, building different surveys and things just to be like, what was the real context of using this for? And as you start identifying the discovery process to that, they were able to determine like, okay, we recognize what these people are using it for level of context. For us, for example, we're going to be using it for all of our wedding activities in about 6 weeks and making sure we're having all of our products and clothes and things pressed in a very efficient way. And when I talked with Courtney about it, she was excited about that, but also just recognizing, okay, I recognize like this is going to be a huge important model. I will look through the right channels of marketing tools to push towards that, like whether it's partnering with the Zolas of the world and making that as a key product, whether it's directly for registry or even just as a partnership level. The other side of it then, in terms of an established brand, is I've talked to my friends over at Bespoke Post, and they have built over these past number of years an incredible internal community of loyal customers. And by loyal, and going back to the point, that doesn't always mean they've bought a lot of stuff. There's this level of connection and connectivity that they've built from over time. And you tie it, whether it's through cell phone number or through email address, that you then bring into this like internal inner circle of product feedback. So they have been pushing more into the world of private label and building their own products. And they're like, hey, we want to build the best raincoat. What do we need in terms of features that makes the best raincoat? And they're learning, and they're evolving and interacting product, going through each iteration and building the best product to it. They're able to then turn around products within 45 to 90 days and sell it out for first batches. And from what we've called the blast wave radius, you build your first level of customers and grow over time in terms of the first loyal customers over time. And it's been really interesting to me to see that happen, because then you just keep evolving and building your products. And I've seen even brands like Allbirds do this. Glossier has done this. Winky Lux, actually, another great beauty brand, has done this into a way that they can actually launch products within 75 to 90 days now, using that internal community. Now, is this going to work for everyone? Of course not. But it still leans on the purpose of like, the more time you can interact with your customers in all different channels, the better of an opportunity you will to figure out what channels are right for you. I'm never going to say like what's right in terms of it, but just the more time you're learning and evolving, the better.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points and really great examples. One thing that I keep thinking about is, I think someone tweeted about this the other day, but whether it makes sense to start a community before you actually start releasing products, and kind of how do you actually do that? I'd say, like, Kiva or Anna, what are your thoughts on this when it comes to maybe interesting case studies of you seeing brands being able to build like a really strong loyal following without really having to engage too much in like SEM and Facebook ads?
I'm happy to go. I'm actually, funny enough, calling in from the office of one of my portfolio companies today, a company called Midday Squares, and they have probably the most unique content strategy that I had ever come across in my consumer or investing days when I met them. They basically made the incredibly unique and brave decision when they launched to share absolutely everything that they do on the journey of building the company, which means they have in-house videographers who follow and sit in on meetings, follow around every member of the company, and witness the ups and downs, which means not just the things that everybody would necessarily be comfortable always sharing, but honestly, the most emotional parts of the entrepreneurial journey. And what has happened over time and just that constant collection of that content and sharing it with the world is that people feel a part of building this business. People who are consumers feel like they're there every day in this roller coaster. And when you find that you love your product and you identify and express yourself by being an early adopter of that product, feeling like you actually are part of the team behind it is probably the definition of a powerful community. And so that investment in that constant content collection and content editing, which is no light lift, has built an absolutely powerful international following of this company. That means that when they ultimately go into a market that hasn't carried their products before, people know who they are. There's built up demand. There's excitement for what they're doing. And that's all excitement that ultimately doesn't need performance marketing to ultimately catalyze.
That's amazing. That's super, super cool and innovative. It's almost like instead of spending a budget maybe on, performance marketing per se, you are almost like just spending money on really trying to like be transparent with your customers and having them be along for the ride and be there. How about you, Anna? What are your kind of thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, I guess the examples that came to my mind, one of them I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with, is called Vacation. They had a really unique approach to launch. And to your question about like, do you build community before you build product and brand? I think the strongest like brands that have been able to leverage interesting owned media assets and communities have done so without the expectation that they're going to sell them anything ultimately. And I think that's kind of the unfair advantage that those guys have. So they have a radio station called Poolside or Pool Suite. And they have had, 1 million daily active listeners like at their peak. And it's just a really cool, unique place where people hang out and like, it's got a unique point of view. It's got an irreverent kind of personality. And from that, they realized that was something that resonated with people. And, what's a product that you can launch to kind of go along with that personality? And sunscreen is where they arrived. And so their like followers basically just onboarded straight from the radio experience into the product experience. And they have really just like enhanced what the radio experience is through the product suite. So like when you order something, you get the like shipping and receiving docket and ledger, and you get like a car freshener. And they've really just kind of owned this whole, they've built a full lifestyle ecosystem around one like thread that they pulled at that really worked. So that's obviously harder to do because you have to invest years in building out a radio station and like not selling people anything and not making much money from it. But those are, I think, really just, it's kind of like an organic relationship that the customer now has. And you can kind of sacrifice a little bit probably, and they don't do this luckily, but like on other things that like take investment from the brand up front when you're like immediately running it, launching product, because their customer is willing to give them a little bit more leash because that trust is there. So that was one that came to mind. And then the other one I'll mention quickly is a really cool one called Ruby. It's a hibiscus water. I clean my inbox to zero like constantly, and I always wait for this newsletter to show up in my inbox on Sunday mornings because it has nothing to do with hibiscus water. It's like arts and culture recommendations. It's just this whole weird like world that this guy's created. And as a result, you're like, okay, what is this? What am I like buying into right now? And it turns out that it's hibiscus water that you can buy at Whole Foods. So that's a really cool one. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is that like brands that have been able to get off of dependency on paid traditional acquisition channels have a tighter relationship with their consumer, and will ultimately, that's an investment that you make up front that you win back, multiples of down the line when you're not paying to acquire customers on fast, like non-retentive channels.
No, I mean, those are Yeah, no, those are, I mean, all of these have just been such great examples. I would say, since it seems like in a lot of these examples, the founder is very much attached to the business, meaning that, like in Midday Squares, for example, how they're following the founders and the team around, you kind of come to know them, you come to recognize. Do you at all, as investors, maybe get nervous about that as you underwrite risk? How sometimes like attach the founder in case the company doesn't work out, to make sure that maybe there's like a separation between founder and brand? Or do you actually just love that they can be so attached? Maybe Kiva, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, the level of risk that we're talking about is just inherent in this stage. Like, we're talking about investing in companies that are so small that we want, in order to get the returns for our investors that we need to grow so large, that there are so many things that could go wrong. And certainly, even if the founder is not so integrated into the outward facing story to the consumer, if the founder isn't the right person to get that level, they're not easily replaceable until they've reached quite a bit of scale. And so in my mind, that trade-off of added risk is overcome by the fact that in our world where there's just so much media out there, and we're so used to consuming products from brands that are owned by companies that don't really care about us and don't really look like a lot of the consumers out there, it's worth the trade for me to make that human connection as close as possible and know that it's going to be a little bit of a wild card what those founders are like over time. But it's on us as investors to diligence to form that trust with them. And in my mind, that's why the time that we spend with these people, asking really hard questions, having really honest conversations about their vision and what things will be like during the ups and downs of building, is such time well spent. And so when we ultimately come to that conclusion, there sure is a lot of risk in it, but I think that the risk reward is quite attractive.
So that's really also part of the big diligence process too, right?
Absolutely.
Making sure there's obviously alignment there, and really understanding obviously the founder's long-term vision and someone that you can obviously trust. Sumit, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, trust and authenticity I can never hammer down enough onto it, it's one of the most important pieces for any brand and anything for founders to create from here, And what I think is interesting about it is authenticity can come, it should always come back to what the brand stands for, what kind of mission it stands for and values it stands for. But again, everything always evolves over time as you're learning from your customer, because yes, of course, trust and authenticity matters to it, but there's also something to think about called threshold prices. I've been spending a lot of time looking at the business of streetwear and sneaker culture, and I've been looking a lot into the StockX's and the GOATs and the Grails of the world. And what is interesting to me is what the intrinsic value of a product in correlation to an income bracket or the spending power of a customer always comes through. If you take a pair, and I'm just pointing out like the poster I've got back here, and it's a bunch of some of the rarest Jordan 1s out there. It's the one that really translated between basketball culture and sneaker culture. You take the Jordan 1 Chicago, if you have someone with like maybe a lower income bracket or someone who just like does not have a larger spending power, they're going to treat that like a gold brick. Like, they're going to take care of that. It's their rainy day fund. They're going to find ways to really treasure that product from it in terms of versus the actual wearability of it, right? You find that threshold price over time where you find the great mix between ability to afford the product and the ability to actually utilize and spend time with that product. Versus, of course, when you get to a higher income bracket, people will be like, oh, it's just another pair of shoes. I'm just going to wear it and do whatever from there. And then that's where the values of resale come through, where it's a level of democratization to the space too. The reason I'm touching so much on that world of threshold price is that you need to also recognize that is part of your journey to recognize what's your most powerful customer to it. Going back to Anna's conversation with Vacation, when they launched when the guys in Poolside FM, or originally Poolside FM, now Pool Suite, or when they launched it by pure accident as something that basically was a side project. And they were actually like DMing various different people. And I pinged them, like they were trying to find ways to actually do some sort of activation over at South by Southwest. They had no contacts, no network anywhere. There were a bunch of guys over in Great Britain, Scotland, I believe, to be specific, and Ireland. But what is amazing to me is that they learned over time about their customer, and they recognize like this is our unapologetic brand, our irreverent brand that we're going to keep pushing through, that we would then generate our products to it and build that kind of ethos to it. Touching also on Kiva's point about trust and that level, and I see the Jordan Funko Pop in the back. Another brand that just comes to my mind too is Mischief. The agency that is dedicated to build these different products and methodologies and platforms that just could care less and kind of take capitalism and throw it completely on its side, everything that they've done from it. And it's also kind of ironic because Gabriel, who started the company, was a West Point dropout, and he's gone from something where it's like the most, clean cut level to it to just a complete irreverence style to it, but is also taking onto this unapologetic brand perspective. Sometimes you're going to have places where like you're owning it and you're pushing it to customers, and it's not always often that you can pull that off, but you have to find that great balance between what you stand for and the authenticity, and learning from your customers, like, hey, does this actually make sense to you?
No, I mean, those are great points. And I mean, Poolside, it's amazing, or Pool Suite, it's amazing what the kind of the journey that they've been over the past few years. Anna, how about you on this topic?
So I think that as investors, we kind of over-index on the founder story because that's who our relationship is held with. And I think Midday Squares is incredible. And I do feel like that's one rare founder story that's actually been democratized to the public. So it's unusual that founders are able to develop that level of connectivity and communication directly with their consumers. So in that sense, I think what Midday has done is remarkable. But I think for the most part, most brands don't have that level. Like, you don't quite know who the person is that's starting the company, that's selling you the product. You really like the product and you like its attributes, and your friend told you about it, and that person does CrossFit, so you trust them. And so I think we can tend to, and a lot of early VCs tend to, like, over-index on the cool, trendy founder story that then obfuscates, like, what is the real market opportunity? What is the product? Like, yes, I think there's huge alignment between the founder has to be the right person to steward the business. But like, that will definitely get lost on the shelf. And unless, I think about Perfect Bar a lot too. And they had a really incredible founder story. And the kids were basically building the brand in memory of the father who had started Perfect Bars. And that is on every single pack of Perfect Bars. So you have that connectivity in certain products. But I think as far as like generating returns on investment, I try to separate the like emotional attachment to the founder and the team from like what the product and the opportunity in the market looks like.
That's also a great point because, as you move into omnichannel, as you say, like on the shelf, it's just a product, right? There's no really that kind of interaction through content that you might see, because of course, online. How, I was, when is the right moment to go into omnichannel? I've had on Ernesto Schmidt from the Craftery, who, when he came on the podcast, he told me that he thinks consumer brands are heading into retail way too early. I then had Andy Dunn on, who coined digitally native brands, I believe, who said that he says that he thinks that more and more brands should actually launch with retail in mind, and that even maybe go earlier into retail. What are your thoughts about this as you invest and advise in brands? Maybe Anna, we can start back with you on this.
Sure. I think retail is super important. I don't know if there's a right answer for like what size revenue do you have to be before you can start considering retail. And I think it's super segmented by category as well. So there's a different retail strategy for a beauty brand because of the subset of retailers that are great beauty retailers than like the strategy for food and bev. So all that to say, it's very case dependent. I think retail, like the consumer wants the availability of the brand wherever they can find it. So they want it on Amazon, they want it on D2C, they want it on, shelf. And that's the consumer want. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to pull off on the brand side and on the, like from a logistics, from an inventory, from like a scale perspective, all of that is very hard. But I think if you're constantly checking in with your consumer and building the right channel strategy to inform retail, and I'll go back to kind of the food brand example. You can kind of tell right off the bat by listening to your customers online if they want to see that product in Erewhon or if they want to see that product in BJ's. And like you build off of those insights. And once you have kind of the sufficient quantity of data to suggest what the most efficient retail strategy will be, that's when I think, you prep yourself to live on shelf. But I think it's super important, and it kind of got glossed over in the like golden age of DNVB, like D2C investing, that like retail was way less sexy. But retail is not going away, and it's still just the majority of like volume that's pushed in consumer purchasing. So I love when brands are gearing up for retail launch.
No, I mean, those are all great points. I know there's kind of not one silver bullet here when it comes to when to go into retail. But how do you think about the question, Kiva, since you are also investing at kind of an earlier stage than Anna?
So I tend to think that online is the safest place to start for some period of time because there's very low friction to change. I have seen in the first year of many brands' lives, the packaging change, the product change, the sometimes like the name of the company has changed. And so those are things that once you have sold product to a distributor, you often in that situation may not even know every retail account that it's in. So there is no way of pulling all of that back and making a change constantly. So I tend to think that the first year or two when you're selling online is a really, really good opportunity to test and learn and build up an awareness and a trial of your product with people who are tolerant of it not being exactly perfect, and use the feedback that you receive to ultimately say, I feel confident enough now that there won't be major overhauls happening in the next year or two. For some companies, that day comes earlier because they're ready to get their product out the door. For some companies, that day comes earlier because they need retail infrastructure. It's a heck of a lot easier to scale online for years if you're selling a supplement or a shelf-stable food product than a refrigerated beverage, like something like that. And so often there's an element of like channel product fit to it. But I would say in general, don't rush to, figure out the things that you need to ultimately form a retail strategy. But also don't assume that you can wait forever, because there's a lot of competitive barriers that you can start to establish in your favor once you're ready to go into retail.
Of course, there's no silver bullets, as I said before, but it seems like you are more so maybe on like the Ernesto Schmidt side, and that maybe wait until later. You don't need to rush in, go into retail. Of course, product dependent.
Yeah, I mean, for most companies that I've been involved with, when we invest, retail is still in the future or very, very recent. So I would often say like not in the first 6 months after launch most of the time, but definitely like on the roadmap by the time we invest. And I don't tend to connect, at least in the food and beverage and personal care world that I tend to spend my time. I don't think it makes sense to be D2C only once you're 5-6 years in.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me also a little bit of a conversation that I had with at the first summit, we did a Q&A with Clayton Christopher, and he was saying how with one of his portfolio companies, like they completely mismanaged Target. And, you kind of assume, oh, you're in retail, all we do is just ship and then it will kind of get on shelf and sell. And and he was like, yeah, they completely mismanaged it. And it was just a massive mess. So also when you go on a retail, know that it's also, you certainly do need to pay attention to it and take it seriously as another channel. Samit, what are your thoughts on this, by the way?
Yeah, definitely echoing the sentiment of both Anna and Kiva. I would just mention one other additional piece is that context matters, right? Kiva's right. It's like you can launch a company on direct consumer online yesterday, because there's so many great tools that you can basically just launch and get ready to go within 15 minutes or so. I mean, there's Shopify building out an e-commerce strategy so quickly. You have a lot of headless commerce startups and companies that have been built out too. Retail is interesting to me always because it has to be a very contextual level to it. Meaning that, Warby started retail by pure accident. And there was more of a response to the fact that they had consistent emails from people saying like, hey, I live in New York. Is there a place maybe I can go try them on in person instead of just having to get the home try on? And, Neil and Dave just threw together a quick studio and showroom in their office. And of course, it all took off. It's why even today, you can even try on and buy glasses from Warby in their headquarters. It's kind of a methodology that they've always kept to. What's also interesting about the world of retail is that you've got a lot of intermediary brands that have helped you, that can help a brand test out a retail play. So companies like Neighborhood Goods, companies like Foxtrot, companies like Brick and Click, so on and so forth, that have an opportunity to put your product in position. Now, the difference is you can have it on your shelf, and that is not enough. It has to be some sort of contextual level to it. And as a hypothetical, for example, at Neighborhood Goods, they worked out with, I believe it was Tonal, where you had an opportunity to test and try out the fitness product. Touching on a company like Nori. Imagine if they partnered with Nordstrom, where you have an ability to actually come on in and get your clothes pressed in a snap and just have an opportunity to test and try out the product. If you're going to be really going, or when you're going to be going into an offline experience, you want to make sure that there's an opportunity for someone to actually truly experience the product itself. And of course, you want to try to find the most cost-effective strategy, even if you're 2 years in, 1 year in, 5 years in, whatever it is. It's that level of really in its purest form marketing that will then convert to that level of brand loyalty, of course, hopefully by a transactional level, but also just by a brand recognition standpoint.
Yeah, no, those are all excellent points. And I always love the example with Warby Parker and about how that was purely accidental and that became, that's really, really interesting. My final question for you all is, since I think we're running out of time here, since I'm sure we have a lot of e-commerce brands in the audience, when does it make sense to fundraise? When does it more make sense to be a lifestyle business or a bootstrap business? Maybe Kiva, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, that's like a very, very difficult question, especially because there are very, very different types of investors who will have different expectations for, what their capital means and what success looks like for them. I guess in large part, I would say that very few businesses end up being worth over, call it $100 million in, under 10 years, call it, in the world of consumer goods. A very small percentage relative to the grand scale of businesses that get started out there. And think of $100 million in value in under 10 years as almost like an absolute minimum in value and an absolute maximum in amount of time that a venture capitalist can get comfortable with in achieving the return that they need to achieve. So with that in mind, for most folks, taking on capital from that type of capital source will set yourself up for you to answer to a group whose success looks like something that's basically impossible to you. And so with that being said, you have to decide really early on, is that feasible? Is that my vision for this? Is that the life that I want to build? Because if it's not, quite often avoiding the tempting early injection of capital that will put you on the treadmill of needing it forever, it really is worth avoiding as much as you can. If, however, you have that vision and you want to build something of that size in that period of time, then planning for the future and getting to know these folks is one of the most powerful things that you can do.
No, I mean, it's a really great point. Especially, I appreciate you putting the number as well, about 100 million, just to kind of understand kind of what success, the minimum version of success if you're venture back looks like. Samit, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, Lawrence Linehan, who was one of the original partners at First Mark Capital, a long time ago, wrote a piece saying that stop aiming for the $1 billion brand in consumer. And Kiva mentioning the $100 million goal is a great midpoint. And he actually meant, I think Lawrence actually had mentioned specifically that as the midpoint for a brand to truly make strong venture returns. And I've heard, I think from him, it was 50 to 200 million is the ultimate goal in terms of within under 10 years of growth for a company there and a consumer product company. So I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Kiva says. And, I will always say this as even a venture capitalist, if you don't have to take venture funding for a business to grow, don't. Because we have our fiduciary duty to our investors. We're expecting 3 to 5 year time horizons, 7-year stretches for the companies that we're investing in, and we have to hit our returns. Our goal is to aim for those returns. Back in the days over at Brand Foundry, we had definitely a bunch of great fund returning companies, but we still had a lot of that pressure to make sure the rest of our portfolio would not even hit zeros from it. It's a very difficult double-edged sword to be taking capital from venture, and I think it was Chris from First Round Capital who also mentioned that taking on venture funding is like rocket fuel. You have to be ready for that because then your steering company it's either going to be taking off like a rocket or it can easily turn into a runaway train. And so it's that mentality you have to be prepared for if you're going to be taking not even just venture funding but institutional funding, whether it's private equity, whether it's growth equity, whether it's down the line when you become a publicly traded company that you let a hedge fund take on capital from you. It's that level of perspective that you have to be prepared for, and that you have to be ready to experience. Could you build a business and do 10, 15, 20 million in revenue and build a great functioning business in the end? Absolutely, of course. You could also end up having that company sell for 3, 4, 5 times revenue multiple, and that's a great ending for it. I can think about easy half dozen consumer product companies that ended that way and only took very little funding. Scott from Sir Kensington's immediately comes to mind, and great friend and a great team over there. I think it's that mentality that you just have to make sure that you check in with your systems, but build the relationships with investors in the venture capital world. Just because you have to talk with them on fundraising, that doesn't mean you have to have that conversation. We're humans too, as much of an easier job we admittedly have compared to founders. I mean, being a founder is one of the loneliest jobs in the world, and it's something that I think not enough investors actually take into account for it, and they don't make the ecosystem better. But that's another story for another time, and I can 100% tell you that the other 2 investors on this panel here, Anna and Kiva, respect that ecosystem very, very dearly.
Love that. And those are some really great points. Anna, I think we'll end it on you on this question.
Very little to add. I think when any one of these 2 decides that they want to invest in your business, that's when you take venture capital money.
Nice. Well, I think that our time is up. Is that right, Derek?
Yeah, we're good on time. So yeah, we can end it here. That was perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. This has been so much fun.
So many knowledge bombs there. I love that. Yeah, if they decide that you're investable, then probably a good time to make money. That's actually a really perfect way to end it. Mike, thanks so much. Anna, Samit, Kiva, thank you for joining us. What an amazing panel. And I couldn't agree more. I also just converted my business to Delaware C Corp because we are raising capital ourselves. And I didn't want to go down that path, but ultimately, we have turned into that for scalable, tech company that has to grow or die.
Awesome.
Hey, shoot your shot, Derek.
Yeah.
And also, if you enjoy more of these kind of conversations, our next summit is called the Consumer Goods Summit, which we're going to be talking into a lot more about these topics and also specific verticals as well. It's consumergoods.theconsumervc.com if you do want to check that out. So anyway, thank you so much. This has been such a blast. Thanks everyone for
Mike, you're the man.
For hanging with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll send that link to everybody here in chat in just a second. Highly recommend you go to the Consumer VC and sign up for the email list and the podcast as well. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.